Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Someone Else's Shoes. I'm JR, and this week's guest is Heather Kirk. Heather is a friend of mine that I went to college with. Hi, Heather.
Hey everyone.
Heather has a master's in applied behavior analysis and autism. However, that is not the reason why we're talking to her for this particular episode. And Heather is actually joining us on the phone because we are still in the midst of a pandemic, even though I guess, some states are starting to open up a little more. But Heather is not in studio today, A, because there's a pandemic and I'm not letting people in my house, and B, because Heather is also dealing with being immunocompromised. So before we get into all of that, Heather, why don't you tell us exactly what a master's in applied behavior analysis and autism is?
Yeah, so, I think the easiest way to just sum it up is that it's a science to improving behavior. So, I went for my master's in what I'll refer to as ABA because nobody wants to say that whole long applied behavior analysis thing all the time.
No, I don't.
Right? So, we just call it ABA for short. And, I went into the focus of autism because that's where my passion lies. But ABA, really what we do is that we look at behavior and we look at what behaviors we want to increase and what behaviors we want to decrease. It can be used with anyone in any population, in any setting. So, yes, it is the only scientifically proven treatment for autism, which, I think is very powerful, which is why I decided to go into that.
That's pretty awesome,
Um,
yeah.
right. But like, let's say you are picking your cuticles.
Mm-hmm.
We do that.
Yep.
If you are trying to exercise more, we do that. If you're a business owner and you're looking at work production and, people coming in on time, people taking too many days off, all of that. So it can be applied to basically anything you can think of.
So that's the applied behavior analysis can be related to all of those
Uh-huh.
things. You can use it
Yep.
essentially in any aspect of life, whether it's work or
Yep.
whatever.
Yeah, so we often refer to the dead man's test as a way to kind of help people think of how much it covers because basically what we say is if a dead man can do it, it's not a behavior, but pretty much anything else is. So it's anything
Okay,
that you can observe.
fair.
Yep.
If a dead man can do it.
Yeah, it's a pretty funny way to explain it. When I first heard that myself, I was like, okay,
Yeah, well, it's fair enough, I guess.
right?
Okay, so let's talk about, I guess, let's start with what kind of work you can do with that, because I think it kind of ties into everything, right?
Yeah, yep. So I started out in the field at a nonprofit school solely for kids with autism.
Hmm.
So it looks very different than what you picture when you picture like when you or were in school. And it's direct one-to-one instruction. So every single student has a para as we're used to it, but someone applying those ABA techniques on a one-to-one ratio.
Okay.
And then there's a behavior analyst that supervises that and, trains the staff to implement it and designs those programs and all of those type of things.
Hmm.
So by the time I actually got my master's, since had been working there fresh out of undergrad, I was working with, I would say, young adults because they were 15 to 21.
Okay.
And so during my time there, unfortunately, I did have a pretty significant work related injury where this young woman had pulled my hair from a standing position down to the ground for, I would say, like at least a minute, landed me on a neck brace. And it's kind of just been this journey of trying to figure out what the heck is going on with my body and why it's so mad.
So so talk to us about, I guess, walk us through that whole scenario, right? So how does that end up happening where you're getting your hair pulled first of all and ending up in a neck brace?
You know, a way that I like to explain it to new staff that come into the field, because really what happens, like imagine you or I graduating from undergrad and then just walking into this school where these children, really, because we were serving 6 to 21,
Right.
are fairly aggressive. Pretty much anyone in that program has been outplaced from the school district. So imagine what a school district has to say and what point they have to get at where they're like, yeah, I'd rather pay you $1 million a year to help this kid because I can't manage it.
And that's what it costs per kid.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty expensive. It's
Wow.
it's
And
a
the school
lot.
district covers that.
Yeah, I mean you're getting into like lawyers,
Yeah.
excuse me, and all of that. But for the most part, for a family, the most ideal situation is that the district will pay for it.
Because so like public schools in general have certain programs for people with disabilities or with Down syndrome or autism.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the students that the, I guess, the lay person, the lay teacher can't
Mm-hmm.
handle.
Yeah. So it's at the point where these children are unsafe and unmanageable in that environment. And really, what it comes down to is it's because they're not trained in ABA.
Right.
It is like I said, it's the only scientifically proven treatment for autism. So imagine the struggles that a public school faces trying to serve that population and not being trained in those practices. So there are some BCBAs that, are more of a consult model for public school and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's for people on the spectrum that are okay to be in that environment.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so walk us
So
through what had happened leading up to the hair pulling.
So this client in particular really did not like people in her personal space. Her and I'm grateful for the fact that we bonded pretty early on. And she used to like ask to sit next to me on the bean bag and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think that maybe my guard was down a little bit more than someone who didn't have that rapport would have had.
Right.
And the thing about these type of programs, right, so they get an IEP, so it's an individualized education plan, and what's being targeted is their utmost weaknesses. So imagine, us in high school. I mean, for myself, I used to cut class all the time. So imagine being in high school and having every single class you went to being direct one-to-one instruction and the
For
things that are
you.
the hardest for you. Yeah.
Yeah. If you
That's
don't
pretty
show up,
hard.
people will notice.
Yeah, but in public school, if you're kind of lazy in math because your teacher doesn't really pay attention, you know that.
Right.
There's this kind of different balance where it's almost kind of like you can get out of things a little bit more, but in this setting, there's not only a direct instructor with you at all times working on your IEP goals, there's also a special education teacher and a behavior analyst overseeing everything. So there's really no room for slacking off. And I was assessing something with her that was very difficult for her, but she was handling it very well. And, I did physically prompt her. And what we mean by that is I'm touching her and kind of what we call hand over hand guiding her on how to complete it appropriately,
Right.
which for the record, she apparently does not like.
Yeah.
So I did get my hair pulled from, she was standing next to me, grabbed the top of my hair, pulled me down to the ground and then up for, I would say at least a minute. So it's
Just
not
like over and
exactly,
over again, she just brought you up and down by your hair.
yeah.
Yeesh.
Yeah, it's not like I'm mad, let me pull your hair for a second. It's no, I'm dragging you from a standing position down to the ground by your hair.
Right. And then repeating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
that landed you in a neck brace.
Yes, it did.
And then so did
Which is
you
quite the experience.
yeah, so what happened after that? Were you able to get like workman's comp or
Yeah, so I did go to our urgent care center that we used to kind of refer people to if they had got injured. And they put me in a neck brace, said, take these muscle relaxers, relax, let it heal.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I did get my hair pulled several other times. There are two other times where I did end up in a neck brace. And, I think people have a difficult time understanding why I would stay there.
Right, like you're clearly
um,
in danger, so why
yeah.
why are you going back?
Yep. And I think that is a difficult thing to understand. And I think that for myself, it took me, I guess you could say, more to that breaking point where I said, I can't help them anymore, because that's what it is when you're so passionate about something and you found the thing that you love the most. Because I saw firsthand the difference that this science could make. I had, young adults that would hit their head with their fist hundreds of times a day that now are at what we call zero levels, where, it doesn't happen at all. That's so significant.
Right.
So to find that passion where you actually scientifically can show that what you're doing is effective. So, not only within like your soul that you're helping people, but on paper
Right.
through
Tangibly.
data and research. Yes.
It's
So
there's
that's a
there's
difficult thing
tangible
to leave.
differences. Right.
Yeah.
So, okay, so what happened with that job then?
So essentially what happened was I got to the point where, I was trying to seek medical help. Workers' comp can be very difficult, unfortunately,
Hmm.
and I really wasn't getting treatment. I went to this one neurologist that said to me, I'll get you an MRI if you really want one, but it's just going to come back and I'm going to say, I told you so.
That's and that's like that's pretty
Hmm.
fucked up.
Yeah. And,
Like that's
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 what I
or
had
I
been
shouldn't say that's pretty
waiting.
fucked up. I guess that's pretty shitty bedside manner.
Especially because, he didn't do a physical exam. It's difficult, I think, when someone is young, because, I'm 31 now. So
Hmm.
someone looks at me and they're like, oh, you're fine. You smile, you make jokes,
Right.
you must be good. And it's just unfortunately not how it goes. So I didn't really get the best treatment, and I was trying to continue to work because, I loved my clients and I loved my coworkers. There was nowhere else I wanted to be, but it got to the point where I recognized, my role here really is to manage physical, problem behavior. And
Right.
my role is, we had these walkie talkie systems where the individual working with a highly aggressive client would hold one, say the initials, say the location, and it was my job to run and help.
Hmm.
And while a lot of that is, one-on-one training with the person who works with the client of these are some de-escalation techniques you can use. This is what we've found to be effective with this client as far as teaching some coping skills. But at the end of the day, a lot of it was keeping everybody safe and, ending up in a restraint or guiding a client to a seclusion room, which is physical. So I got to the point where I didn't feel that I could keep those people safe based off, the way my body was trying to keep up with things it just couldn't.
Right. So, okay,
So
so now how did talk us through like how this led to you becoming immunocompromised. You know what I mean? So
mhm,
how did
yeah.
getting your hair pulled at work and going through all of this, ending up in a neck brace multiple times, how did that lead you to essentially having an autoimmune disease?
Yeah. So I had all of these doctors through, workers' comp who they had suggested that had basically said to me, you cannot be having this significant of symptoms from a hair pull. And while I did firmly believe that that's what it was from, I'm not a doctor.
Right.
And, in ABA, we really pride ourselves on, if we're not an expert in the area, consulting with an expert. So if this expert says that I'm wrong, then, I must be wrong.
Right. Cuz you so
Um,
you're experiencing what, like pain everywhere or just, you know what I mean? So is it just the
mhm.
neck that hurts as a result and this
So
is what leads to it?
it was primarily my neck. So if you could imagine, this original hair pull was in 2015. So that's 5 years ago.
Right.
So it's really just continued to build up from there. So while that first hair pull I had, I definitely had a lot of really bad neck pain. It would go down my spine. It would go down my hands. My right side was always worse. So I had a lot of numbness in my hands, a lot of tingling, significant muscle weakness. I couldn't really, I struggled to hold my head up.
Okay.
And that's why I felt, it had to be this hair pull, because it's like the muscles in my neck felt like they just couldn't do it anymore towards the end of the day.
So you just got
But so,
progressively weaker as the day went on.
yeah, as time went on, it just didn't really get better. I tried a bunch of different things. But at the end of the day, if a doctor doesn't think the cause of your symptoms is, this physical trauma, then the treatments or interventions that you're trying to use to heal yourself aren't going to be effective
Right.
because you're looking for the wrong thing. So once I was kind of told, this can't be your hair pull, and my blood work came back that I was at significant risk for a heart attack because I was essentially using this mindset of mind over matter, right? So these people say that there's nothing wrong with you, Heather. So get over it. Push through it. It's pain. You're fine.
Right.
Well, I wasn't.
So
So
so you had blood work done. They said essentially you're at very great risk for a heart attack as a 28-year-old nice young healthy woman.
so I took disability from that job that I had loved because I was at severe risk for a heart attack, I certainly could be helping people manage problem behavior.
Right.
So I took that time to try to quote unquote fix myself. I started seeing other doctors. So even though I had originally thought that my problem was neurological, after being told it wasn't, I was like, all right, so we got to figure out what else is going on. So I was referred to a rheumatologist
Mm-hmm.
who diagnosed me with fibromyalgia. And diagnosing an autoimmune disease can be difficult. There are certain tests that you can do for these like more well-known ones like lupus or
Mm-hmm.
rheumatoid arthritis, but I wasn't testing positive for those specific ones. I was just showing that there was some sort of quote unquote infection.
Okay.
Because that's essentially what, autoimmune diseases are, is it's your body not recognizing how to properly function as far as your immune system goes.
So, and a rheumatologist is somebody who specializes in
Uh,
diagnosing these diseases or infections.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
all sorts of like immune problems is what they work on.
Gotcha. So, what exactly is fibromyalgia?
Essentially, it's very difficult. So I get started and then I'm like, man. So it is a diagnosis, and I don't want at any time to make it seem like I'm saying fibromyalgia doesn't exist, because I think this common misconception of, there's nothing specific in your blood work that's pinpoints fibromyalgia means it's not real. That's not the case. It's diagnosed by showing that you have some sort of immune issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then not showing up for these common ones and really diagnosing it based off these common pain areas. So really, I personally think that's what struck her as the fibromyalgia, is one of the really big areas is your neck.
Okay.
So, there's these kind of pinpoint areas, which is your neck, like right below, as far as kind of like where your shoulder blades are, and then your hips, which I definitely had all of that because at that point, the pain was absolutely just like shooting down my spine.
Right.
I
It was just going
didn't,
everywhere.
and I didn't really have pain in like my elbows or knees, which was part of fibromyalgia, but we kind of figured like, oh, well, that'll come with time. Lucky me.
Right. It's fibromyalgia. You'll get there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've been treated for an autoimmune disease for 2.5 years.
Okay. And
And
what was that treatment like? So you got diagnosed with fibromyalgia,
mhm,
right? And then what happens then? So now you have this autoimmune disease, and that you said it was 2.5 years ago.
yep.
So then what are the what happens next?
It's really such a freaking journey. And I think it really speaks volumes to what it is that people with chronic illnesses, or those especially that have what we call invisible illnesses, where you can't really see how much pain we're in. It's such a struggle. And so really it started out with, this is what you have. Here's some holistic options that could potentially help you feel better. Try that out. And, it was things like yoga and making
Hmm.
sure you sleep and have enough water, all of that stuff. So, I did all of that. I'm a complete yoga nut. And I wasn't getting better. So
Right.
it started to get to the point where they're just tacking on medications. And what I can say is, I ended up having a med interaction where I was in the hospital. Meds for this is not a joke.
For fibromyalgia.
Yeah, it's because really what they're doing is the way that they're looking to treat it, right, is just experimenting with medication. What
Right.
helps, what doesn't, what makes you worse.
Because fibromyalgia essentially is, we know you have an autoimmune disease. We don't know what it is. So it's fibromyalgia. It's kind of like fallback diagnosis.
Yeah,
And
it kind of
then,
is because,
and then they have to just give you stuff to figure out what works to help you.
yeah. So I've been on a ton of medication. It started off with one, and then, you see these doctors every 3 months because it's a specialist, so they don't really allow you to come in more than that. So it's basically like you see the doctor, here's this update. I still don't feel well. I'm still getting better. I'm still struggling to take care of myself. Here, sure, try this other medication. And then it's this 3 months of adjusting to the medication, trying to find some sort of stability. Does it help? Does it not? And the difficulty when you aren't really confident in your diagnosis is that you usually end up getting worse. Like if you're not treating the problem, the symptoms aren't going to go away.
Right. It's experimenting. It's like every episode of House. They're throwing they're
Yes.
throwing a random bunch of meds at somebody, and if they get worse, well, then we know that it's not this, and if they get better, then hey, we fixed it.
hmm But in my case, I wasn't getting better.
Right. They just
Um,
kept swinging and missing.
yep. So from the rheumatologist, she ended up kind of feeling uncomfortable following my med interaction by, I guess, managing the medications. So she had referred me to a psychiatrist that specialized in med management. So after 2.5 years, and it really was right before this pandemic hit. I want to say 2 months before the pandemic hit, I had said, fuck all of this. You're not helping me. Excuse my French. You know how I am.
I know.
I was like, this isn't working. Like, I've given you 2.5 years of my life to help me, and you're not.
Right. So
This
you
isn't getting
so
better.
so over 2.5 years, essentially you're going once every 90 days to the doctor.
hmm
You're telling the doctor, I don't feel better.
hmm
So the doctor's saying, okay, try this.
hmm
And then you would go see the psychiatrist who would figure out the doses.
Yeah. It
And
would
then,
be looking at the symptoms and the med interactions and how high we could go, how quickly. And really, we got to the point where I said to the psychiatrist, I was like, this isn't helping. Like these medications, I genuinely can't figure out what is a symptom and what's a side effect anymore. I don't know if my health is getting worse because it's not being treated properly, or if you guys are just tacking on so many freaking heavy duty medications that I now have all of these extreme side effects.
right, because those meds, because so two two things that I think everybody should be aware of. One, the way, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you treat an autoimmune disease is essentially to remove the immune system.
Yeah, in a sense. So there was a medication called Plaquenil. There's generic ones for it. It's like hydrochlor something that I can't pronounce.
Chlorophyll.
And yeah, it's something. Um, and so it essentially suppresses your immune system because what's wrong in an autoimmune condition is that your immune system can't just attack and identify the bad things. So if you get a cold, your immune system says, hey, that's not supposed to be here. Let me attack it. My immune system says, oh, hey, here's your body. Let me attack it.
Right. You don't need
It
that.
just,
You don't need that
you know,
stomach.
it can't identify between the bad things that are entering our body and the good things that we need to survive.
Right.
So, applying some of these medications, it suppresses it and makes it not so overreactive. But at the same time, then, you're very susceptible to
Everything.
any sort of, yeah. I had a friend that this gets me so much now during this pandemic because she sneezed once. This
Mm-hmm.
is one of my closest friends. We used to live together. She sneezed once in the same room as me, and I got sick for about 3 weeks so severely that, I had to take a steroid inhaler, a steroid nasal spray because my body was closing up so much that I couldn't breathe.
From one
She
sneeze.
she sneezed once and was fine.
Yeah. She never got sick, nothing, but whatever she had that made her sneeze, you got. And
hmm
that's the difference between somebody with an immune system and somebody with no immune system.
Yep, like her
Um,
body fought it. She
yeah.
was a little maybe achy, and then she was over it.
And so the second point is with these medications that are essentially removing your immune system, um, the side effects that correlate with these meds are not, itchy, watery eyes. They're
hmm
far more severe.
Yeah, so this, she had essentially prescribed a lot of different things. So, like, one medication was for the severe pain I was having, another medication was for the nerve pain, another medication is for the muscle spasms. And then here's this other medication, and this was the last one we had tacked on, that it does suppress your immune system and it can lead to blindness. And it's like, so you don't know what I have,
Right. And you want to make me
but you're
blind.
willing to make me blind. Yes. Yeah. So
Oh, goody.
after, yeah, it was about, I want to say 8 months that I was on that because she said that it takes 6 months for your body to really be affected by it.
Okay.
At 8 months was when I, went to the doctors and said, fuck all that. Yeah, I'm done.
Fair. Yeah. I mean, yeah. If you're not getting better and you could go blind at any time, I feel like that's a logical choice. So,
Yeah. And it wasn't like I wasn't having side effects. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of floaters, but it's like
no. No,
maybe kind
not
of
nothing
like,
other than like what's in my drinks.
yeah, no, not that kind, although
Okay.
that sounds preferable.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like these little spots that you get on your eyes, almost like there's a piece of dust flying around.
Oh,
I
yes,
think
I
that,
get those.
yeah, so I have them a lot now.
Okay. I get them
So
from my contacts, but they're like I used to wear my contacts all the time and sleep in them
mm,
when you're not supposed to. So I would get
naturally
calcium deposits, and that's what those were. For
interesting.
me,
Yeah,
for
so I
you,
have
it's
a,
hey, I'm gonna go blind soon.
yeah, exactly. So I have a lot more of that than I was ever really having. And I do get very severe migraines from, the neck pain
Mm-hmm.
and that tenseness in my neck. But the floaters were new. And that was kind of when I was like, all right, if this medication can make me blind, I understand that the eye doctor's saying you're not blind yet, but yet isn't very comforting.
No. And
Yeah.
now, did your insurance cover all these meds? Because I know like meds can be expensive.
Lord, I wish they did. So
Jeez.
over this, let's say 2.5 years, I racked up at least $30,000 in medical debt, and that's with insurance.
Jesus.
So I went to grad school to get my master's degree to better help the population that I love and also be able to make enough of a living to support myself and have a lifestyle that was comfortable.
Yeah.
But instead, I get injured, get I took short-term disability and then I didn't even have health insurance for a while because the workers' comp had denied my claim, saying that my problems could not have been from this work-related injury, any three of the ones that ended up landing me in a neck brace.
And that's
So
because
that's
the doctors were
all.
saying it's autoimmune, it's not from the hair pulls.
Yeah, so they denied my claim because they didn't have any other reasoning other than them saying your symptoms are so severe that we don't think it's from a hair pull. Um, yeah. Well, they had no,
Unreal.
there was no like, let me help you find another diagnosis, let me
Right.
refer you here. It's workers' comp, and they say that's not my problem,
Yeah.
pretty much. Yeah. So I had, health insurance. I started another job that I thought would be manageable because I was traveling. So I would be away for a week and then I'd be home for a week, working from my bed
Mm-hmm.
to try to recover. That, I had my health insurance, but still things add up when you're going to these appointments every 3 months and you're getting worse. It's not like they say, oh, okay, see ya. It's get, 5 vials of blood drawn before you come. Oh, you're here. Okay, go downstairs and get 6 x-rays, get an MRI, get a CT scan. I have had more testing done than I could ever have imagined and still had no answers.
Right.
And it's from my personal opinion because it was all being targeted solely from an autoimmune perspective.
Mm-hmm. And yeah,
And really,
so when you got this next job, right, and you were working for a week, you would travel someplace, um, and then you would take a week off. Were
mhm.
you still at that point, like as the day went on, you were still getting weaker, right?
Oh yeah.
It wasn't like whatever meds they had you on were helping you manage this. This was still like over the course of the day, by the end of the day, I can't do anything, which is why like we're having this call at 2 o'clock in the afternoon instead of 9 o'clock at night, because by the end of the day you're shot.
Yep. Yeah. And really at that point, I mean, it was hard. I was on disability, and it's like I can't even say I was on disability because they denied my claim and I was
Right.
just on, I'm making no money, I'm getting no health care, and here I am.
Right.
Whatever you want to call that.
The American
So I
dream.
wasn't, yeah, right. I wasn't in a good place. It was all hard. Everything was. But I started to look at life as far as they're not helping me. And if I understand ABA to this degree to be able to help my clients, why can't I help myself?
Mm-hmm.
So I really just started looking at it as far as I guess this is it. I guess this is how I'm going to be living going forward at 30, 29, whatever.
Right.
So I'm going to have to learn how to make accommodations for myself so that I can live.
Yeah.
So, that job was really part of that accommodations in my mind. Maybe if I work for 1 week and I'm home that next week, I can find a better balance. The answer was definitely no.
Right. I was
Yeah.
incorrect in that assumption. However,
Yes.
it's worth a shot.
It was some sign of hope and some sign of me being able to love what I did again because I love my job.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it anymore. So I was looking for another route, and this company was an incredible company, and they were so knowledgeable. And the clinical director came out to meet me one time. And, I'm open and honest, like, hey, I have this diagnosis. This is my life. I'm not going to be hiding this from you because it does impact my life and I may need an accommodation,
Mm-hmm.
um, and she is so into research, and her and I just basically nerded out a lot about autoimmune diseases. And when I wasn't able to keep up with it, I kind of had the things that she had said to me in the back of my mind for a while. And instead of it providing a sense of like comfort, it more started to make me feel like something else is wrong, man. Like it can't be autoimmune because then I'd be getting better.
Right. Like you're taking all this medication.
hmm
Why are you not getting better?
Yeah. So I did have to, you know, quit that job, and I started a new one in January where it was local.
This past January.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, very recently. So I had a friend that worked for a company that did in-home services. She liked it, and I was like, hey, all right, whatever. I'll give it a shot. It gives you some more flexibility in your hours,
Mm-hmm.
which, is nice. We are able to work from home, which is obviously another perk. So basically, all report writing, all paperwork, stuff like that is done at home. And then when the clients are out of school, we would go to their house and supervise those programs.
Right.
So
So
I guess,
how did that lead to you essentially? I don't know if it directly correlated, but did it like how did you go from that starting that new job to essentially within the next month or so telling your rheumatologist and telling your psychiatrist that was managing your medications to essentially go eat crow?
yeah, that's pretty much how it happened. So I guess in my mind, I was trying to get back to as close as normal as I could find. And so I'm not traveling anymore. I'm not having this like more up in the air lifestyle where, when you're flying, it's like your flight's canceled. You have this, something always happens.
Right.
So I'm thinking I'm home. I'm really only going out of my house for a couple hours a day. Maybe I can do this. Maybe this is a better balance for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't. It really wasn't. I wasn't feeling better. I was still only able to function a couple hours a day. And it was talking to one of my good friends where she was like, this shouldn't be this hard. Like, you should, first of all, she's always like, you should stop working. You should not be working. You should be taking disability. And I wasn't, I guess, in the place where I was ready to accept that, because it was like, until I've done everything that I think I can do, then I'll get there.
Right.
So once I kind of told them all, you're not helping me, I need a new course of treatment. I had gotten a new GP. This was right before the pandemic hit. So he looked everything over and he had referred me to a new rheumatologist. He had said, okay, I think you need a second opinion. And I was like, duh, that's why I'm here. So, he had referred me to someone else. And then really, by the time my appointment came, we were in the pandemic.
Right.
Yeah. So he was kind enough to do a telehealth appointment, which really has been mind blowing, and very life changing for this whole telehealth thing to be possible. Because what I really was finding was I felt that the doctors couldn't see how sick I was, because I would rest and kind of muster up this energy, essentially over these 3 months just for this next appointment, because my doctor was an hour and a half away from me.
Right.
So it was like, yeah, I'm okay right now, because this is basically like a battle that I've been preparing for,
Yeah.
So like, yes, I took all of this medication and I did all of these accommodations so I can be here, and it just wasn't working. So he was able to just do Zoom appointments from home. He reviewed everything, did what, in ABA we refer to as an informal assessment, but essentially he was just asking me questions,
Mm-hmm.
to, I guess, kind of try to lead him in the right direction. And he had said to me, have you ever had neck trauma? And I just laughed. I was like, have I ever?
Let me
And,
tell you.
right? And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I've had my hair pulled 3 times that landed me in a neck brace. And he was like, okay, yeah, so you've been misdiagnosed. I think you have something called cervical dystonia. I'm like, okay, like what the fuck is that?
Right. It's not one
So
of
he
those.
starts
It's not one of those cool diseases that you hear about all the time.
yeah. So he started explaining to me that a lot of the symptoms I was having was indication that I had too much of those autoimmune medications in my body. So essentially what he was saying is, it's like your body doesn't need what you're giving it, so it's reacting in these ways, which, is interesting, that 2.5 years of me kind of screaming at my doctors like, hey, I'm having all these wild symptoms now, what's going on? No one said, look at that, that's a pretty severe side effect of this medication.
Right.
Yeah, that never happened.
So essentially all the things over 2.5 years, all the things that were getting worse were because of the medications you were taking, as opposed to having fibromyalgia, which you do not.
Yeah, that's kind of up in the air. But I think at this point it's kind of that fibromyalgia, if I have it, it is a side effect of cervical dystonia. So
Okay.
it's, yeah, it's kind of like your body has not had proper treatment for so long that there may be something else going on. But the root of your issues is cervical dystonia, is what he said. So there's a
Gotcha.
lot of, I don't even know how to put this right. So there's a lot of things that you can get from just having one chronic illness, because when one part of your body is affected and unable to work properly, it ends up affecting so many others.
Right.
Yeah. So, he told me to research it, and, I laughed and said, like, I'm happy to research it. I just really need you to know that Like, this is going to be a deep dive.
Right.
Like when you can access medical journals and you can access all of that research, it is difficult to, just Google
Right.
because
You're not going
what,
to WebMD.
mm-hmm. I'm going to WebMD and then I'm like analyzing all of what it says. And then I'm doing like a deep dive into medical journals. Um, and which, I just like to prepare a doctor because it's like, I'm going to come back with a lot of questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
I
hope you
just,
know what you're doing to yourself here.
it's just I need you to be mentally prepared for like the me you're gonna get.
Right. Because otherwise we can just have a conversation now and you could just tell me the things you want me to find out.
Yeah. But he wanted me to do this deep dive, as I keep calling it, because he wanted for me to be able to see if something else jumped out at me, which it did. There are a lot of other things that can be co-occurring with dystonia that I could potentially have. So when he is available in July, I have an appointment in late July to do some of the other tests that need to be done in person to figure out if I have other co-occurring diagnoses because of the cervical dystonia.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, there's so much that could be said.
I know. So I guess even though you were misdiagnosed or potentially misdiagnosed, I guess you were just misdiagnosed, right? There's no potentially you have cervical dystonia and they thought you had an autoimmune disease and now it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely cervical dystonia.
Yes, I had an appointment with a neurologist that I was lucky enough to have a friend refer me to, and she's fabulous. And so she specializes in Parkinson's, which, when we're talking about Googling and
Mm-hmm.
when you Google what you have, that's the type of stuff that comes up. Like
Right.
it's bringing up Parkinson's and MS, and you're kind of like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Like, are you telling me I have Parkinson's right now? And that's why I don't like when doctors tell you to research yourself, because it's like when
Right.
you've been this sick for this long, like I have quite genuinely thought I was dying.
Yeah.
When I got that blood work back saying I was at severe risk for a heart attack and nobody knew why and nobody would see me because they were all too busy, I didn't know what was going to happen. So, when you finally get a diagnosis and then you look something up and it's saying something as significant as Parkinson's, you're like, uh, what?
Yeah. And so but
Um,
in reality cervical dystonia is one thing and Parkinson's or MS or even fibromyalgia or whatever the case may be can result from you having this.
yeah. So
But
I
not
guess
necessarily they're not necessarily correlated. Like if you get cervical dystonia, it doesn't mean you're going to get Parkinson's.
yes, because I guess with cervical dystonia, there's kind of two onsets. One is some sort of physical trauma, and the other is something that develops in the brain.
Okay.
So I guess essentially, if you have the type that is more affecting your brain, you're more susceptible to Parkinson's.
Okay.
Um, so at, for me, I guess really we're at the point where she ordered a ton of blood work. She scheduled a brain and neck MRI to see how much it's progressed and how severely it's affected my spine and essentially my brain, because it is obviously so close.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of figuring out, because I have widespread symptoms. I have, when my symptoms worsen, I have difficulty walking, I'm unstable. It's almost like you're essentially your nervous system is broken, is what the doctor said to me. So I don't think we really realize how much your nervous system controls. So really what we're at right now is figuring out how severely my nervous system has been damaged and how widespread it is, because there's all different types of dystonia. So it's like, has this cervical dystonia in this specific area due to that trauma now caused me to have generalized dystonia where it's affected my whole body? Or is it, there's something called POTS where it's like, it's not very pleasant, but it does have to do with the dysregulation of your heart rate, which I do like. I remember we were talking the other day. So right now my heart rate is 108 fat burn and I'm sitting.
Right. You have the resting heart rate of a hummingbird.
Yeah. So it's looking at things like that, has this cervical trauma affected your nervous system for so long? Because essentially we've been treating you for an autoimmune condition when it seems to be primarily a nervous system issue.
Right. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's safe to assume that 2.5 years ago, if they had caught this or correlated what you were going through with the hair pulling and neck trauma that you reported, right? It's not like
Yeah.
you kept this, to yourself. They asked
Oh
you
yeah,
what had
definitely
happened,
not.
and you said, "Here's the everything that I've been going through." And
Hmm.
if those doctors had put two and two together 2.5 years ago, there's a very good chance, A, you would have an immune system right now, and B, and B, you might not have the resting heart rate of a hummingbird. You might not, at the end of every day, um, need a pillow behind your head to prop your head up because you can't support your head with your neck muscles anymore.
Yeah, yeah. I think that if it had been treated, essentially it would stop the progression, right? Because
Yeah,
that's what we're looking for, is we're either looking for a diagnosis to reverse the symptoms, which doesn't appear to be a possibility for me, but it at least would have stopped the progression.
right.
Because it we talk about, you're saying like it's not like I was quiet, I everything's documented
Yeah,
when you get hurt at some place like that. Like, you have to fill out an incident report.
right.
I went to our urgent care center. It's not like I wasn't doing anything. Um, it just, so my nervous system was so severely affected, um, that, so what it's like is, so my whole body is in pain. I think of it like when we're back in science class and they pull out, the actual body, and there you can see like every muscle and every joint and
Mm-hmm.
everything like that. I've never imagined pain in every single one of those areas. Like, I can feel muscles that are deep in my tissue.
Right.
Incredibly painful, incredibly tight. It's basically like, when you're working out and you push yourself to that brink where you feel like you're going to shake and just collapse.
Yes.
That's what I do every day. So every
Just by
day, simple
living.
tasks. Yeah, just like getting up and, getting dressed. I can barely lift my right arm. So I can really only lift my arm. Um, I don't even know how to explain it, but I can't lift my arm over my head with my right side at all.
As of right
So,
now, just because of what you've done so far today.
yeah, well, that's like all day, every day. I will never be able, I mean, I don't want to say I will never be able to, but without proper treatment, I have not been able to lift my arm independently over my head. So if I want to lift my right arm up to stretch, I have to grab my right wrist with my left hand and pull it up. And you can like hear things popping and crunching and moving.
Jeez.
Yeah. So it really was so severe, and it got to the point where, I mean, I couldn't sleep at all, which affects you so much. If you can't, like, imagine, one
Yeah.
night that you don't sleep, you're kind of groggy and out of it the next day.
I have a 2.5-month-old. I know exactly what it's like not getting any sleep at night.
Yep.
there's,
Oh
there's
gosh.
where you and I relate very well.
Yeah, right.
Not sleeping
That's
takes
funny.
its toll.
It really does. So I think that that too could have, worsened things for me, where it's like my body isn't resting. Therefore, there's no possibility of healing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to keep going like this.
Right.
And I was at the point where so I'm not working, and I am still living in my house in West Haven, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay my rent with no money,
Yeah.
how I'm going to get medical care. And I can't even remember things from the point of me sitting, right? So I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh, I need to go do A, B, and C. I'd stand up and have no freaking clue what I was doing.
It's got to be
No
scary.
idea.
It's got to be so
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. And so that's why I say, like, I really thought that I was going to die. I couldn't remember anything. I could barely do basic hygiene skills. I could not cook. Um, so then, your nutrition's going down the tubes
Right.
and all of those things. It's so difficult, I think, a lot of times for doctors to realize how much things can spiral.
Yeah. Well, not to mention if all of your muscles ache, right? You need muscles
Hmm.
to do everything.
Yep.
So like just eating requires jaw muscles.
Hmm. Eating. Ugh. And it's funny. Ugh, it's so bad. It's so, I love to eat.
Not with that reaction, you don't.
I know, but it's so funny because now that is my reaction, right?
Right, eating. Ugh.
Hmm. So
Like
this,
not ooh, boy, I would love this nice juicy steak.
no, it's eating is a whole different ball game now. It's like I'm hungry. What can I chew? How swollen is my throat? What can I swallow?
Right.
My jaw, I get to the point where it is cracking and like almost like this like crinkling noise when I'm moving my jaw at night, and I hear that my hearing is being affected, like where it feels like you're going underwater and you're like, yo, this can't be good.
No. And that's
So that's
and that's a I actually had that at one point. I
mm,
had I think it's a TMJ or TJM or whatever it is. It's that
yeah,
jaw
yeah.
muscle. Um
Hmm.
because I had a tooth on one side of my mouth that was essentially a cavity. I just like didn't consciously think of it, but I just
Mm.
chewed on one side of my mouth all the time
Oh yeah,
to the
yeah,
point where I felt like I had a bug in my ear.
yeah.
And I was like
Oh
freaking out because my ear canal was swollen to the point where it was affecting my hearing.
yeah,
And they were
I
like,
can
"Yeah, you
relate
just
to
need to go
that.
see a dentist. There's nothing in your ear." And I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? I need to see a dentist."
Yeah, well, the collaboration across specialists is such an issue in my opinion, where they're just like, "Oh, not my problem. Go see someone else."
Yeah,
It's like, no, no,
yeah. I
this
mean,
isn't
this
how.
doctor was
Like,
like, "I
yes,
think you
but
have a
no.
swollen TMJ, so you should go see a dentist so they can fix whatever's causing it." Which
Good.
for me, I was like, "Okay, but like, how the fuck does that work?" Like, no one explained to me how the correlation is there, but they were
Oh
like,
yeah, they
"This
definitely don't
this is what
explain
I think you have,
it.
so go to this person."
Hmm.
Um, but like for you, so you had 2.5 years of progression that could have been avoided.
Hmm.
So I guess
Yeah.
my next question, I guess, is you talk to the new doctors, right?
Hmm.
Your GP, or who said initially, I think you have cervical dystonia? Was it your GP?
It was the rheumatologist
The new
actually.
rheumatologist.
When I told the GP
Right,
what he said, he just stared at me through telehealth, of course, and he was like, "That's really rare." I was like,
right.
"Uh-huh,
Okay, so
let's go."
your GP recommends you to a new rheumatologist. Your rheumatologist says, I think you've been misdiagnosed. I think you have cervical dystonia. Go look it up. So then you do the research. Then you go and see the specialist. What was the specialist again?
She's a
A
neurologist.
neuro. Okay, so then you go to the
Hmm.
neurologist, and the
Yep.
neurologist says after you've looked all this up and you know what cervical dystonia is now,
Hmm.
the neurologist looks at
Yep.
you and says you 100% have cervical dystonia.
Yep. Yeah.
What is your reaction at that point? Because now you know what cervical dystonia is. It's not
Hmm.
a fun disease,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what is your reaction now at this? You 100% have this.
It's so odd because, I think most people that get that type of diagnosis early on are going to feel, pretty devastated. It's you mourn the life that you had is the
Right.
best way that I can describe it. But I had mourned that life 2.5 years ago. Been there, done that, over it. Tell me what I
Right.
have. So, that's really the point that I was at when she said to me, you 100% have this. And the reason why she said that was because I was so not used to someone giving me a diagnosis
Right.
and saying, you have this, because I was asking her if there's any follow up questions or anything that I should bring back to the rheumatologist. She just kind of looked at me and was like, no, I mean, you 100% have cervical dystonia. Like, you can just tell him that you have it. I was like, oh, cool. All right.
Right.
So it really was more of a discussion about, what else could have happened due to it. I had asked her about Parkinson's because she specializes in Parkinson's and
Hmm.
movement disorders, which is why I went to her because, it seemed like she was one of the few people in Connecticut that was very knowledgeable in the area. So,
Right. And you have a hard time
I
moving.
Yeah. So that's what led me to her. So I knew she was an expert in her field, and you could tell just by the way she was speaking to me, the thoroughness of her physical exam. She just looked at my neck. She didn't even, so she asked me to put my hair up. She got like a better look of, I don't even know what these freaking muscles are called. Is it your traps that are like right below your neck?
Nah, I
I'm
don't
making
know.
this up.
It's been a
I don't
it's been a
know.
long time since I was a nursing student. Let's just call it neck muscles.
Yeah, right. So she took one look there and was like, "Oh, your muscles are very tight." And I'm like, "Uh-huh." And she's like, she asks me to like move my shirt so she can, examine whatever. And she's like, "Oh, yes." She was like, "This must be very painful." And it seems like the smallest thing to say, but that validation was the first time a doctor has said to me, "Yes, I can see it." Because I started to try to explain to her my symptoms. And, she started to take a look at my hands, and I was trying to explain to her, these joints look this way right now because my appointment's at 9 a.m. But as the day goes on, they get insanely swollen. You'll see like they look bruised almost, like my veins are popping out, all of this stuff. And I was like, I took some pictures. That's what my GP had recommended if you'd like to see them. And she goes, "Oh no, I believe you." And I was like, "Thank you." Like no one said that to me before,
Right.
which is
None
kind
of the
of
doctors that you had been going to had just acknowledged
what was
your actual
happening.
symptoms, like what
Yep.
you were telling them. They were just saying,
Mhm.
"Okay, sure, sure, here,"
Mhm.
as opposed
Yep.
to, "No, I believe you. That's why you have cervical dystonia."
And it's funny because, it definitely took her being an expert in her area, because other doctors would look at this and they're like, "Oh, do you work out?" And I would be like, "No, I only do yoga. Like my body cannot handle anything else." And they were like, "Oh, well, you must be very effective at your yoga." And I'm like, "No, that's not what yoga, what?" Like, I'm like, "Oh Lord," like they're missing the whole thing. So
Yeah.
it was definitely a breath of fresh air when I had talked to her, for
Yeah,
sure. And
I
I
can only
think
imagine.
yeah, it's really just more about, I guess it's really more about the hope that you get when someone says, "I believe you, this is what you have." Because before then, before you really have an accurate diagnosis that you feel confident in and that you feel like can really improve your life, it's like you go 3 months fighting for your life to have an appointment where someone says they still don't know what to do with you.
Yeah. And they wouldn't see you prior to 3 months. Like if you had a bad
Mm-mm.
reaction to medication and stuff and you called them, they wouldn't be
Yeah,
like, "Oh
nothing.
yeah, come on in, let's take a look at
Mm-mm. It would just be like, "Oh, okay, so stop taking it."
it."
Okay, but like you realize I was taking it for a reason. So are you going to
Right.
do something else?
No, no, we'll see you in 90 days.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's awful. That's
Yeah, it's not
ridiculous.
ideal. Yeah,
Okay, so
I would agree.
yeah. Okay, so now you have this diagnosis and now you're in the midst of this pandemic because I can't pronounce
Hmm.
words. Um you're in the middle of the pandemic. There's a word I can pronounce.
Oh, you crack me up.
So, you're right in the middle of the pandemic.
Hmm.
And so how does life, because like you still, for all intents and purposes, you're still immunocompromised, right? Like you don't
Hmm.
have an immune system. Regardless of
Yeah.
whether you're off these meds or not, like your immune system has been taken away because they thought you had fibromyalgia. So
Hmm.
before and during the pandemic, has your lifestyle changed drastically? Or is it essentially like, this is already what I do?
It really wasn't as big of an adjustment for me as I think it probably has been for the rest of the world.
Like people who
For
aren't
me,
immunocompromised.
yes, yeah. For people that, don't have those chronic illnesses that they're living with every day. I was quarantined probably about 2 months before anybody else was, because, I had seen it obviously in other countries, and people were discussing it and discussing it coming here. And I mean, my doctor said like it's probably already here. So I wasn't going out much already. I was
Hmm.
only leaving the house for a couple hours to see my clients a couple days a week because the severity of my symptoms were so impactful that I quite genuinely was not able to do much.
Right.
It's just with the pandemic in mind, it's like, okay, so I already have to struggle to muster up the energy to go to the grocery store and get my own groceries. Cool, guess what? You can't go. Okay.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know?
Like now it's you just can't go because
hmm
you could die. It's not,
Yep,
and like it sounds almost over dramatic, but
it does.
it's
And I think
legit what it is. It's like if you leave
yeah.
your house to go to a grocery store, you could just die.
And it's scary because it's like, when you've been through so many health issues where your life is something that you're not sure about, and then to have a pandemic hit, I was just at the point where I felt like maybe I'm going to get proper medical care now. I have this new team of doctors, like maybe someone's going to help me. And then it's, no, you can't leave the house at all. Not even for a doctor's appointment. Doctors aren't open. Even this rheumatologist said, like, I can't see you until the end of July. It's just a long time to wait.
Yeah.
So, those medications that did suppress my immune system, I just recently got off of those. So I had started out this pandemic still under the impression that my immune system is very fragile.
Right.
So I mean, I wasn't even interacting with my family. Um, if something's delivered, everything was wiped down and sanitized, just like, everybody's doing now. But I had started all of that a little bit earlier on.
Right.
I think it's hard because it distances you from people even more, but I think it's almost a blessing in an odd way because now the rest of the world knows what it's like to not be able to leave your house.
Yeah. Like everybody got a big wake up call as to what people who are immunosuppressed essentially do every day.
Like, when you are out in public and you sneeze and don't cover your mouth and you don't notice, I noticed. When you cough and then touch something, I've always noticed, but
Hmm.
no one else really saw the severity of, taking those precautions because it didn't affect them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy when you think about it that way.
Yeah. I mean, it is, but it's just, I guess it's just one of those added things that you have to overcome when you come to terms with the fact that you have a chronic illness.
Yeah.
Your life
So,
just looks different.
yeah, well, so let's actually talk about for a second help, right? So
hmm
you've been essentially living on an island for for, let's call it 5 months instead of 3,
hmm
right? And really it's just you've been living on an island for 2.5 years, and it's just kind of become a much smaller island
Yes.
in the past 5 months. So because of all of this COVID stuff, so where does your help come from?
So I am lucky to have a lot of very great friends that have, turned more into family over the years. I think help is hard, especially for people that live their life being very self-sufficient. Um, I'm not afraid to ask for help. When I first started working in that ABA company, it was almost a joke. Like my clinical director used to call me her stalker because if I needed something, I was finding her.
Right.
Like I have a question and I need an answer. Like I would go around the school and find whatever office she was in and be like, hey. But I think that advocating for yourself is different when you don't really have anyone because I think it's harder for friends to understand because they're not necessarily living with you. They don't see that every day. It's almost easier to fake it for a couple hours than to not deal with people's questions sometimes. But I have some great behavior analyst friends that have been very helpful. because I think they understand the world in the same way that I do. I made one of my very close friends used to be the special education teacher in one of my classrooms. I do have family, but what I think is difficult is, they're not very well versed in the medical field. So, my mom is super old school Italian, and like Italians don't go to the doctor. We just eat more bread. Leave us alone.
Yeah, it's fair.
Right.
I've been
My
doing that.
dad's
Been doing that
from,
my whole life.
right. Yep.
Dip in a
And,
little
my
sauce, you're
dad,
good.
my dad's from Canada, and he is very healthy. He's over 70, and he is probably healthier than I am. So the idea of navigating the medical system hasn't really been something that I had someone to guide me through. I have another very close friend that's a social worker, and her knowledge has been very helpful in figuring out what to do, because she's the friend that I was referring to tried to get me to take disability.
Right.
And when I had got this diagnosis, I was talking to her, and she kind of really just said, no, you qualify for this, Heather. Like, if anybody qualifies for disability, it's you. And so it was really at that point where, like, I didn't feel bad taking disability, I guess. I would say the other support is my dog. Everybody knows me, knows I'm kind of a crazy dog lady, but when I first started getting bad, and I mean, like, I would stand up, at night just to go pee, and I would be falling over. Riley just kind of decided that she was going to help me. And anytime I stood up, she'd hop right up so quick, and she would stand directly next to my legs to stabilize me. So, hopefully I wouldn't fall over. And if I did, she was there for me to kind of like catch myself on.
Mm-hmm. And
Um, and
you've had Riley longer than all of this.
mm-hmm, yeah, so she's a little over 8 now. And so, I mean, she's been my ride or die from that point going forward. And I think it's been really unique to be able to see her kind of decide herself that she wanted to help me. And, I trained her up a little bit, and she qualifies to be a service dog, so she's been like, there's no way I could have done that traveling job without her. She
Right.
literally would pull my suitcase throughout the airport. Like, I would tie her leash onto my suitcase and just like hold it, and then I'd be like, go, and she would pull it
Yeah.
for me. It sounds silly, but it's like those little
Yeah.
things that are so hard for me, she can do. Like, if I tell her
Mm-hmm.
to get it, she'll just pick something up for me so I don't have to bend all the way.
Right.
There's so many things. So,
Yeah. It's just the little things that
yeah,
make life easier.
yeah,
And
definitely.
what about like day to day simple, not necessarily simple tasks, but like how do you get your groceries now? You know what I mean? Like, because Ridgefield
Hmm.
doesn't really have Instacart, so like how
Yeah.
do you get your groceries when going to the grocery store could still kill you?
Yeah. I think thankfully the pandemic has really allowed people to see how difficult it is for someone with chronic illness. And Ridgefield has this program called like Ridgefield Responds. And, this very kind woman volunteers to get my groceries for me. So that's definitely been helpful.
That's good.
Yeah.
So yeah, because that's what I'm like. I can't imagine is like you're going through all this stuff, and you have this way of life that you finally, I don't want to say gotten used to, but like it works, right? It's not fun, but
Hmm.
it works.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way, you're gonna die if you leave the house now.
Yep. I
So,
mean, that's really what it is. I think that, and it's very nerdy of me to say this, but I think the thing that probably saved me the most was ABA. I had that moment where I sat back and said, if I can help them, I can help me, right?
hmm
So I just started looking at every little quote unquote problem I had, right? So every barrier that I came across in my daily living, I would look at it and say, like, if this was my client, what intervention would I be putting in? So, my short term memory sucks. I have found a planner that works well for me, that has, everything that I need on it. And it sounds silly, but, the right visual supports, as we call it, can make, a big deal of a difference in our lives. And I would say it's been more of my own healing and my own accepting that no one was helping me, and what I was going to do about that. So that kind of started, to be honest, before the pandemic. And I think that's what allowed me to manage this pandemic a little bit more,
Yeah, that's great.
if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
it makes perfect sense. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Heather, for taking the time to discuss all of this craziness that's been going through your life for the past 5 to 2.5 years.
Yeah,
Um,
my pleasure.
yeah,
Thanks
and
for having me.
I don't know if there's any lawyers out there, but I feel like you would have a very good suit on your hands
Yeah, right.
for
Yeah.
for malpractice. Um,
Mm.
so I mean, I'm not. It is what it is. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you out there for listening. And we will see you next time on Someone Else's Shoes.